Hey, this is going to be a quick video on how to change a standard 4-motor drivetrain into a 6-motor drivetrain in your code. To start, we'll assume that you already have your 4-motor drivetrain configured as usual in the robot configuration panel. This is relatively straightforward to do. You just go through and you select the ports and choose the right size for your wheels, your gear ratio for your drivetrain, and the cartridge you're using. Then behind the scenes, VEXcode Pro has generated code that supports those motors running on those ports for you. But you notice we only were able to choose 2 motors per side. So if you have 3 motors on each side for your 6-motor drivetrain, we'll need to make changes to the code that was automatically generated. So most of your code lives in main.cpp. This is where pre-auton, autonomous, and user control functions are. This is normally the only file that you'll be making changes to. But over in robot.config.cpp, this is where the devices that you have configured turn into generated code that you're then able to use in main.cpp. So this code, you'll notice we can't change. That's because we need to be in expert robot configuration mode in order to do so. So that's what we're going to have to do to enable editing of this file. But first, let's take a look at the code that has been generated for the drivetrain. You'll notice we put our motors on ports 1, 2, 11, and 12. And we can see that reflected here with left motor A and B on ports 1 and 2, and right motor A and B on ports 11 and 12. Similarly, we chose blue cartridges, which have a 6:1 ratio. So we can see it says the ratio is 6:1. If I were to change this over here to green and say done, we'll see that update, and now it reflects the 18:1 ratio that green motor cartridges have. And the third parameter here is a toggle about whether or not the rotation direction of the motor should be flipped. You want the forward direction for the motors to correspond to the forward direction for your robot. So typically the motors on the left side of your robot would be flipped, and the right side of your robot would be opposite of that. So you have false here and true here. If we had flipped the direction of forward, those would flip backwards as well. So that's how the configuration settings that we have in this panel over here correspond to the generated code on the left. But what we need to do is make some changes that we can't make through this panel, specifically adding a 3rd motor to each of the left and right sides. So what we're going to have to do is, in order to make changes, we will have to enable expert robot configuration. To do that, we go to the top, click 6-motor drive, that's the name of my project, and check expert robot configuration. This pop-up is telling us that once we enable this, we can't go back, and it will prevent us from using this panel in the future. So you should save a copy of your code before you do this, just in case you need to go back, because you can't unenable this. But any changes that you would have to make over here, say if a different device, motor, or sensor, you needed to change its port or something like that, you can do that in the code over here. You just won't be able to do it through the menu over here. So we'll say yes. And now that panel's gone, and we're able to make our changes here. So to add a 3rd motor, we'll go ahead and just copy what we have. We have to give this 3rd motor a distinct name. I'll call it left motor C. We'll set the port that it's in. We'll say it's in port number 3. And other than that, the ratio should presumably match the other 2 motors on that side. Again, in this case, we're assuming that they're all 18:1 or green cartridges, and that they're all flipped. It typically makes sense to have all of the motors on one side match this and the other side be opposite. This would be different, though, if one of the motors needs to spin in a different direction than the others. So for example, if you have two motors attached to gears that are adjacent, those gears will never spin in the same direction. They'll always spin opposite to each other. So one of them would need to be flipped, not the other. So that depends on the build of your robot. So we added the motor. The next thing to do is add it to this motor group. So these three motors are added to a motor group called left drive smart. So we will just add a comma and left motor C so that this third motor is part of that motor group. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the right side. We'll add a new motor in port 13, call it right motor C, and add right motor C. All right, so that is all of the changes that we need to make. And now we have a 6-motor drive that should otherwise have all of the same functionality as the built-in 4-motor drive. A good way to test this is to first lift your robot up so the wheels aren't touching the ground, and then I would recommend unplugging all of the ports except one at a time. So unplug 2 and 3 and leave only motor 1, the motor A in port 1 plugged in, and make sure that when you use the joystick that the wheels spin in the direction that you want them to. Then unplug this one and plug in port 2 on its own, test again, same thing for 3, and same thing for the other side. If any of these are set up and it doesn't spin, then maybe you have a port mismatched. If any of them spin but in the wrong direction, that's an indication that you need to flip this false to a true or the true to a false based off of your robot. All right, that's it.